I never imagined the first time I'd hear my daughter's voice tremble with such conviction. It would be as she stood on the witness stand, testifying against me. The courtroom felt colder than winter itself, though the air was still. My hands gripped the edge of the table in front of me, knuckles white, heart hammering as if holding on tight could stop the walls from collapsing around me. Her words sliced through me, each one delivered with the certainty of someone who had rehearsed this moment. He was careless, he didn't protect me, he only thought of himself, my own daughter, my flesh and blood, painting me as a villain before strangers in black robes and sharp suits. My throat tightened, but I couldn't speak. If I opened my mouth, I was certain I'd shatter. I searched her face for something familiar, the sparkle in her eyes when she was little, the warmth of her smile when she used to call me Dad, but all I found was distance, an icy wall I couldn't climb. She wouldn't look at me. Every time I shifted, hoping to catch her gaze, she turned away, as if the sight of me was unbearable. The murmurs of the courtroom blurred into static. I barely heard the questions, barely processed the judge's steady voice. All I could hear was her, my daughter, my little girl, telling the world I had failed her. Each sentence was a wound, each pause a reminder that she no longer stood beside me. I wanted to rise, to shout the truth, to beg her to remember who I really was. But I sat there, silent, drowning in disbelief. Tears threatened to spill, but I held them back with every ounce of pride I had left. My heart didn't just break. It splintered, jagged edges tearing into every memory we had built together. The silence after her testimony was deafening. For a brief second, the world seemed to stop, and I felt the weight of every choice I'd made pressing down on me. How had we come to this? How had love turned into accusation, devotion into betrayal? But the worst part wasn't what she said. It was the secret life I never knew she lived. Before the courtroom, before the betrayal, there was just us, me and my daughter against the world. After the divorce, when her mother walked away to build a new life somewhere far from our broken home, I promised myself that my little girl would never feel abandoned again. She was barely 7, too young to understand why the house grew so quiet, too innocent to grasp why her mother's hugs became fewer until they disappeared completely. I remember kneeling down, brushing the tears from her cheeks and whispering, "You'll always have me. Always." Life after that was not easy. Every paycheck vanished faster than I could count it. Rent, groceries, school supplies. I skipped meals more than once so she could have seconds. I patched up my old shoes with glue so I could afford to buy her new ones for her growing feet. Nights were long, filled with overtime shifts and aching bones, but mornings were worth it when she came running to me with her hair wild and her smile brighter than the sunrise. She was my reason, my anchor, my joy. She was smart, smarter than me, I used to say with pride. Teachers praised her essays, her sharp mind, her curiosity about everything. I'd sit with her at the kitchen table, helping her with homework, though half the time she was already 3 steps ahead. She loved reading, and I loved watching her lose herself in books, her lips moving silently as if the characters were her closest friends. I kept every drawing she made, every certificate she won, taped proudly to the wall of our cramped apartment like treasures in a gallery. We had rituals, little things that made our bond feel unbreakable. Pancake Sundays, where I'd burn the first batch every time and she'd laugh until her belly ached. Movie nights with popcorn spilling everywhere. The way she'd crawl into my lap after a bad dream and fall asleep to the rhythm of my heartbeat. She was more than my daughter. She was my partner in survival, the one who made the struggles bearable. People often asked how I managed alone, how I could juggle work, parenting, and exhaustion without falling apart. The truth was, I did fall apart plenty of times, but I never let her see it. My tears belonged to the shower, my fears to the darkness of sleepless nights. To her, I was strong, steady, the unshakable pillar she could lean on. And I wore that mask with pride, even when my chest felt hollow. Looking back now, I realize those years were the happiest of my life. We didn't have much, but we had each other. She called me her hero once, after I stayed up all night sewing a costume for her school play out of scraps of fabric. I remember the way she beamed when she said it, the way her tiny arms wrapped around my neck as if she believed I could protect her from anything. And I believed it too. That's why the memory of those days cuts so deep now, because I truly thought nothing could break us apart. I thought the love we built brick by brick through hardship and sacrifice was unshakable. I thought I knew her heart, her dreams, her world, but I thought I knew my daughter's world. But I was wrong. The first time I met him, I wanted to believe he was harmless. He had that polished charm people wear like a mask, quick with a smile, quicker with compliments. He shook my hand firmly, looked me straight in the eye and called me sir with a respect that felt rehearsed, not real. My daughter was glowing that day. Her arm looped through his as though he were some shining knight who had swept her off her feet. She was only 17 then, still more girl than woman, but the way she looked at him, it scared me. His name was Marcus. Older than her by a few years, not enough to raise suspicion legally, but enough to carry a dangerous imbalance of power. He drove a sleek car that gleamed under the streetlights, a car no boy his age should reasonably afford. He wore designer sneakers, carried the latest phone, and spoke with the kind of confidence that only comes from someone who's never truly struggled. He wasn't just a boyfriend. He was a symbol of a world I had fought to shield my daughter from. At first, I told myself it was just young love. Every parent dreads the moment their child starts dating, and I wanted to give her the freedom to explore, to make choices. She insisted he treated her like a queen, that he understood her in ways no one else did. "Dad," she would say, rolling her eyes whenever I cautioned her, "you're overthinking it. He's not like that." But little signs began to gnaw at me. She started coming home late, excuses tumbling out of her mouth too quickly to be believable. She wore clothes I'd never seen before, jewelry far beyond what my wallet could provide. When I asked, she said Marcus spoiled her, but the words soured on my tongue. Gifts from boys like him were never free. I noticed the shift in her language too. The gentle tone she once used with me was laced with sharpness. She started, questioning every decision I made, comparing me to Marcus. If I suggested saving money, she'd sneer. "Marcus says investing is smarter." If I asked her to focus on her studies, she'd laugh. "Marcus says college is a waste of time." Slowly, I began to disappear from her world, replaced by his voice echoing through her thoughts. It wasn't just Marcus, though. There were others, his friends, his circle. Flashy boys with expensive watches and girls draped in designer clothes. They lived recklessly, spending nights in clubs and days in half-slept haze. They whispered promises of fast money, easy success, shortcuts that mocked the years I had spent breaking my back to earn honest pay. And my daughter, so bright, so full of potential, was mesmerized by their glittering lies. I tried to intervene. I sat her down one night, her phone buzzing relentlessly in her hand as Marcus's name flashed across the screen. I begged her to see the truth, to understand that people like him didn't care about love, only control. She stared at me, her expression unreadable, and then said words that sliced deeper than any knife. "You're just jealous, Dad, because he gives me the life you never could." I sat in silence, the weight of that sentence pressing me into the chair. Jealousy? No. It wasn't jealousy, it was fear. Fear that she couldn't see the bars of the cage he was building around her, one gilded gift at a time. From then on, the distance grew wider. She stopped confiding in me, stopped laughing at our inside jokes, stopped looking at me with the trust she once did. She started locking her phone, guarding her secrets, living two lives, one in my presence and another in his shadow. I watched helplessly as Marcus tightened his grip. He attended family gatherings with practiced politeness, offering to help carry groceries, charming even my neighbors. But his eyes betrayed him, calculating, predatory, always scanning for weakness. I could see it, but my daughter could not. To her, he was a savior. To me, he was a storm looming on the horizon. I tried to warn her, but every warning only pushed her closer to him. And with each passing day, I felt her slipping further away, her innocence swallowed by the world he represented. I told myself I could still save her, that my love, my sacrifices, my years of raising her alone would be enough to break through. But deep down, I knew something was changing, something I couldn't stop, and yet I had no idea how deeply their poison had already seeped into my daughter's heart. There are battles in life that no one applauds you for, the kind fought in silence behind closed doors with nothing but grit and love keeping you upright. That was my life after Marcus came into the picture. My daughter's world seemed to glitter with things I couldn't give her, while mine was measured in unpaid bills and aching bones. Still, I carried on, because that's what a parent does. You fight until there's nothing left, and then you fight some more. The days blurred, together one shift bleeding into the next. I worked at the warehouse during the day and picked up evening shifts at a small convenience store just to make ends meet. My body felt like it was breaking piece by piece, but I told myself every dollar mattered. Every sacrifice was worth it if it meant my daughter had a chance at a better future. I kept a photo of her taped to my locker, her bright smile in a school portrait, just to remind myself why I was enduring it all. But while I worked myself to exhaustion, she grew more distant. When she was younger, she used to wait up for me, curled on the couch with a blanket just to hear about my day. Now when I came home, the lights in her room would be off, or worse, she wouldn't even be there. Sometimes she'd slip in long past midnight, tiptoeing through the hall with excuses ready on her lips. Study group, she'd mumble, or just hanging out with friends. I wanted to believe her, but my gut told me otherwise. I tried to hold on to the small things, the fragile threads of our bond. One Friday, I brought home her favorite takeout, hoping we could share a meal like we used to. She barely touched it, distracted by her buzzing phone. "Eat something," I urged gently. She sighed, rolled her eyes, and muttered, "I'm not hungry." Her fingers flew across the screen, Marcus's name lighting up again and again. I sat there, chopsticks idle in my hand, staring at the girl I once knew and wondering where she had gone. Weekends were no better. I'd suggest a movie night, a walk in the park, even a simple breakfast together. Every time she had an excuse. I already have plans. Marcus wanted to take me somewhere. I have homework. The walls between us grew taller with every rejection. I could see her slipping, but no matter how hard I reached, my hands closed around nothing. Loneliness became my companion. The apartment, once filled with her laughter, echoed with silence. I'd find myself lingering outside her door, listening for signs that she was still my little girl somewhere inside. Sometimes I heard her voice, low and secretive, whispering into her phone late at night. The tone was different, sharp, defensive, almost like a stranger lived in my daughter's body. I wanted to knock, to demand the truth, but fear held me back. Fear that if I pushed too hard, she'd vanish completely. Money grew tighter as her needs grew bigger. She wanted new clothes, new gadgets, things I could barely afford. I gave what I could, even when it meant going without. I told myself it was normal. Teenagers wanted independence, wanted more than their parents could give. But somewhere deep inside, I knew it wasn't normal. It wasn't just adolescence. It was influence. Someone was feeding her hunger for more, convincing her that what I offered wasn't enough. I remember one night vividly. I had just come home from a 16-hour day, sweat soaking through my shirt, my back screaming in pain. She was sitting at the kitchen table, scrolling through her phone. I forced a smile and said, "How about we watch that movie you used to love, the one with the silly talking dog?" She didn't even look up. "I'm busy, Dad." The words were flat, cold. I stood there in silence, my heart sinking. Busy with what? Busy with who? It's strange, the things you remember. The way her hair fell across her face that night, the exact tone of dismissal in her voice, the heaviness in my chest as I walked away. Parents are supposed to be strong, but in that moment, I felt fragile, like glass about to shatter. Still, I kept going. I worked, I paid the bills, I cooked meals she barely touched. I held on to the hope that she'd come back to me, that this phase would pass. I told myself love was stronger than influence, that no one could take my daughter from me if I kept believing in her. But hope can be cruel. It blinds you, makes you ignore the signs until they're too big to overlook. I should have known something was coming. I should have seen the storm building in her silence, in her lies, in the way her eyes avoided mine. Still, nothing could have prepared me for the night she came home with eyes full of secrets. The shift from distance to open conflict came faster than I ever expected. What began as small lies quickly grew into something darker, heavier, impossible to ignore. She used to at least offer reasons when she stayed out late, flimsy as they were. But now she didn't bother. Nights stretched into mornings and I'd wake to the sound of the door creaking open at dawn, her footsteps dragging across the floor. I tried to stay calm at first. I'd wait at the kitchen table, coffee long gone cold, rehearsing the words in my head. I'm worried about you. Please, just talk to me. But when she finally came in, her eyes red from the night, her tone sharp with irritation, the words collapsed in my throat. Instead, I'd whisper, "Where were you?" And her reply was always the same, "Out." The lies stacked up quickly. Study sessions that never happened, school projects with friends I never met, money she needed for books or for supplies, but that vanished into thin air. I gave it to her anyway because what else could I do? Saying no only sparked arguments that left the walls vibrating. She'd accuse me of not trusting her, of being controlling, of holding her back. And each time, I wondered if I was losing her completely. The arguments grew sharper, cutting into the fragile thread that still held us together. One evening, after a particularly long shift, I asked her why Marcus seemed to pay for everything when she claimed she needed money from me. Her eyes narrowed, her voice venomous. "Because he doesn't make me feel guilty for wanting things. Unlike you." The words stung more than any slap could. All I had ever done was give. My time, my energy, my very life. And yet in her eyes, it wasn't enough. There were nights I'd pace the apartment, phone in hand, debating whether to call the police just to make sure she was safe. But what would that do except drive her further away? Other nights I'd sit in her empty room, staring at the walls covered in photos and memories, wondering if the girl who once adored me was gone for good. The coldness became unbearable. Meals went untouched. Conversations ended before they began. She avoided eye contact, her phone glued to her hand. Marcus's name flashing across the screen like a warning I couldn't heed. It wasn't just distance anymore. It was another life she was living, one I wasn't allowed to see. I sensed it, the way a parent always does. The shift in tone, the constant secrecy, the lingering smell of perfume that wasn't hers, the traces of a world she carried back from wherever she spent her nights. But denial is powerful. I didn't want to believe my daughter was slipping into something dangerous, something toxic. I told myself it was a phase, that she'd wake up one day and realize what she was doing. I clung to that hope like a drowning man clings to driftwood. But hope couldn't silence the shouting. Our home became a battlefield. She'd storm past me, refusing to answer questions, and I'd follow with desperate pleas. She accused me of suffocating her, of trying to control every aspect of her life. "I'm not a little kid anymore," she screamed once, slamming her door so hard the frame cracked. I stood there in the hallway, fists trembling, wanting to remind her of all the nights I carried her in my arms, all the sacrifices she never saw. But the words stayed locked inside. The distance became an abyss. I watched helplessly as she drifted further into Marcus's world while I became a stranger in her eyes. The girl I raised, the girl I would have bled for, seemed unreachable. And then, just when I thought I couldn't take the silence any longer, she made a mistake. A small slip, an oversight so simple, yet so damning, that it cracked open the fragile facade she had built. Then one mistake exposed everything she'd been hiding. It happened on an ordinary night, the kind where exhaustion weighed so heavy on my shoulders I barely noticed the small details around me. But that evening, as I dragged myself through the front door, something caught my attention. My daughter's backpack was tossed carelessly onto the couch, half open, spilling papers and notebooks across the cushions. She was nowhere in sight. I bent down to gather the mess, planning to leave it neatly on her bed when I saw it, an envelope stuffed with cash, far more than I ever carried in a month. My hands trembled as I held it, my mind racing through possibilities I didn't want to believe. When she finally came home, hours later, her eyes widened the second she saw me holding the envelope. "Where did you get this?" I demanded, my voice low but shaking with restrained fury. She froze, lips parting as if searching for the right excuse. "It's not what you think," she whispered, but her hands shot out to snatch it back. I tightened my grip, refusing to let go. "Not what I think? Then tell me. Tell me why my 17-year-old daughter has more money in her bag than I earn in weeks. Tell me why you've been lying, sneaking out, treating me like a stranger." For a moment, her mask slipped. The softness I once knew flickered in her eyes, but it vanished just as quickly, replaced by cold defiance. "Marcus takes care of me," she spat, her voice trembling with pride. "He gives me opportunities you never could. He trusts me." "Opportunities?" I echoed, my stomach twisting. "What kind of opportunities put this much money in your hands? What has he dragged you into?" Her silence was answer enough. My chest constricted, panic rising like fire in my veins. "Tell me you're not dealing with drugs. Tell me you're not—" She cut me off with a sharp laugh, bitter and broken. "Why do you always assume the worst of me? You don't know me anymore, Dad. You don't know anything about me." That was the moment the truth began to unravel. Over the next few days, bits and pieces surfaced, each revelation heavier than the last. Whispers from neighbors about late-night parties, rumors at her school of stolen goods, of schemes Marcus and his friends were running in the shadows. I confronted her again and again, but each time she slipped further from my grasp, until the night the police came knocking. 2 officers stood at my door, their faces grim. "We need to ask you some questions about your daughter," one said. My world tilted, my knees nearly gave out. They spoke of fraud, of illegal accounts, of her name tied to signatures and transactions she should have never touched. My little girl, my pride, was being investigated as part of Marcus's operation. When she came home that night, escorted by one of those officers, she didn't look ashamed. She looked angry. At me. As if I had betrayed her by daring to question the life she had chosen. "You called them, didn't you?" she accused, her eyes burning into mine. "You just want to ruin everything for me and Marcus." "Ruin everything?" My voice cracked. "He's using you. Can't you see that? You're just a pawn in his game, and when it's over, he'll walk away free while you pay the price." Her jaw tightened. "At least he believes in me. At least he gives me something real. You've only ever given me rules, limits, and disappointment." Those words gutted me more than any accusation ever could. All the nights I'd gone hungry so she wouldn't, all the double shifts, all the sacrifices, they meant nothing in that moment. She had rewritten history, casting me as the villain while Marcus stood as her savior. The weeks that followed blurred into a nightmare. Legal documents arrived, cold and clinical, dragging me into a case I barely understood. And then the unthinkable happened. My daughter chose Marcus over me even as the charges loomed. She refused to testify against him. Worse, she allowed his lawyers to use her testimony to paint me as negligent, unfit, a father who had failed so completely that she had no choice but to seek out Marcus's world. The day I received notice that her statement would be used in court against me, I sat at the kitchen table staring at the papers until the words blurred. Betrayal doesn't always come with a knife. It comes with a signature, a declaration, a voice you once trusted tearing you down in public. I begged her one last time, tears streaming down my face. "Please don't do this. Don't stand against me. I am your father. I have loved you through everything. Don't let him destroy us like this." She looked at me then, her expression unreadable, but her voice was steady, chilling. "This isn't about us anymore, Dad. This is about survival, and Marcus is the only one who understands that." My heart cracked in a way that can never truly heal. She wasn't just drifting away. She was choosing to sever the bond entirely, aligning herself with the very man who had poisoned her mind. And no matter what I said, no matter how hard I fought, she stood firm, letting me become the enemy in her story. I showed up in court on the first day, praying it was all some mistake, that when she saw me sitting there, she'd remember who I was, remember the love we once shared. But when she took the stand, her eyes never met mine. She spoke with conviction, with rehearsed confidence, each word a dagger to my chest. And that's how I ended up sitting in a courtroom, listening to my own daughter's voice tear my world apart. When the courtroom doors closed that first day, I stumbled outside as if I'd aged 20 years in a matter of hours. The air felt too thin, my chest too tight. I had heard my daughter's voice rise in defense of Marcus, in condemnation of me, and every syllable seemed to echo in my ears long after the judge dismissed us. I sat on the courthouse steps for what felt like hours, staring at the traffic, passing by, wondering how the world could continue so normally while mine was collapsing. People rushed around me, their lives intact, their families whole. I wanted to scream at them, to shake them and say, "Do you know what it's like to lose your child while she's still alive?" But the words stayed locked inside. When the news reached friends and family, the ripple effect was immediate. Some rallied around me, old colleagues, neighbors, and a handful of relatives who had seen firsthand how hard I'd worked to raise her. But others weren't so forgiving. Whispers spread. Had I been too strict, too lenient, too distracted by work? Did I drive her into Marcus's arms by failing to give her what she needed? The cruelest voices weren't strangers. They came from those closest to me. My sister, her aunt, shook her head one night over the phone. "You must have missed the signs," she said softly, but with an edge that cut deep. "Kids don't just end up like this overnight. What were you doing while she was sneaking around?" Her words replayed over and over in my mind as I lay awake at night. What was I doing? Working double shifts, paying bills, cooking cheap meals, stretched over 3 nights, saving every spare dollar for her future, sacrificing my own dreams so hers might blossom. And still, here I was, alone, accused, humiliated, while Marcus sat somewhere smirking, letting my daughter fight his battles. Shame became my shadow. At the grocery store, I caught glances from people I barely knew, their whispers curling in the air like smoke. "That's the man whose daughter got caught up in that mess," they'd murmur. Every sideways look felt like a judgment. I stopped going out unless necessary. I withdrew, my world shrinking to the walls of my house, a house that had once been filled with her laughter. But anger simmered beneath the shame. Anger at Marcus for preying on her, at the system for failing to protect her, at myself for not seeing it sooner. Most of all, anger at her, for choosing him, for standing against me, for rewriting the story of our lives into one where I was the villain. Nights were the worst. The silence pressed down like a weight, and memories invaded uninvited. I would see her as a little girl, running across the yard with scraped knees, holding out her arms for me to carry her. I would remember the way she used to curl against me on the couch during thunderstorms, whispering, "Don't let go, Dad." And then I'd hear her courtroom voice, cold, distant, practiced, and the contrast nearly tore me apart. Friends tried to comfort me, but their words slid off like water on glass. "She'll come around," they said. "She's young. She doesn't know what she's doing." But they didn't see her eyes when she looked at me. They didn't hear the steel in her tone when she defended Marcus. That wasn't youthful confusion. That was loyalty, deliberate and unshakable. And yet through it all, Marcus himself stayed silent. He didn't testify. He didn't speak to the press. He let her burn every bridge, let her fight every battle, while he lingered in the background like a phantom pulling strings. That silence was its own cruelty, because it forced the spotlight onto her, and by extension, onto me. The loneliness was unbearable. I wandered the house like a ghost, brushing my fingers over the framed photos on the walls. Birthday parties, school plays, vacations we could barely afford but made happen anyway. Each picture was a reminder of what once was and what was now gone. I kept asking myself the same question. Where did I go wrong? Was it the divorce? The long hours? The rules I set? The boundaries I drew? Was there a single moment I could point to and say, that's where I lost her? But the more I searched, the less clear it became, until the blame circled endlessly back to me, gnawing at what little strength I had left. Still, deep down, a fragile thread of hope remained. Maybe the trial would reveal Marcus's true nature. Maybe she would see him for what he was before it was too late. I clung to that thought even as each day seemed to chip away at it. But the trial wasn't over yet, and the truth had one more. The days leading up to the conclusion of the trial were a blur of paperwork, lawyers' meetings, and restless nights. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her standing in that courtroom, her eyes distant, her voice sharp. I replayed her words, over and over, feeling the weight of each accusation like stones pressing down on my chest. But slowly, painstakingly, the truth began to emerge from beneath the lies. Evidence surfaced, messages, photographs, and bank statements that showed the extent of Marcus's manipulation. He had coerced her into actions she didn't fully understand, exploiting her youth and trust. The money, the late-night trips, the secrecy. It was never just her choice. She had been guided, shaped, and pressured into a double life that none of us could have anticipated. I watched her as each piece of evidence was presented. I saw flashes of confusion and guilt cross her face, brief moments where the mask slipped and the little girl I had raised shone through. It was heartbreaking and hopeful all at once. The courtroom, once a place of judgment, became a stage where the truth began to untangle itself, revealing the chain of manipulation that had entangled my daughter. Even then, forgiveness wasn't immediate. It couldn't be. My heart was raw from the weeks of betrayal, the sleepless nights, the constant ache of seeing her choose another over me. Anger lingered, sharp and bitter, but alongside it grew understanding. I began to see her not as a traitor, but as a victim of someone far more cunning than either of us had imagined. I reflected on every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every meal skipped so she could have enough. I realized that all those years of love hadn't vanished. They had only been overshadowed by a web of deception that had nothing to do with my failure. My love had been steady, unwavering, even when she couldn't see it. That was the lesson I carried into the courtroom each day. That love is not measured by obedience or acknowledgement. It exists quietly, even when invisible. By the final day, the narrative had shifted. Witness after witness, document after document, exposed the truth about Marcus's role in her choices. He had manipulated not only her, but also the perceptions of everyone around us. The courtroom murmured with recognition as the evidence stacked against him. And for the first time in weeks, I saw a flicker of relief in my daughter's eyes. When it came time for the verdict, I held my breath. The judge spoke slowly, deliberately, as if aware of the years of pain contained in that room. Marcus was found culpable for coercion and exploitation, while my daughter's actions were understood in context. A young person misled, not malicious. Relief flooded through me, but it was tempered with the gravity of what we had endured. Nothing could erase the weeks of betrayal or the heartbreak she had caused by trusting the wrong person. I reached out to her afterward, quietly, without fanfare. Our eyes met, and for the first time in months, she didn't look away. There were no words at first, only the silent acknowledgement of shared pain, of mistakes, of lessons learned. I hugged her tightly, not just as a father who had been betrayed, but as a parent who understood that love could endure beyond anger, confusion, and fear. The moral of this story was not in punishment or retribution. It was in the resilience of love, in the strength of patience, and in the clarity that comes when deception is finally revealed. Life had tested us, torn us apart, and yet, even after the sharpest betrayal, the foundation of our relationship remained intact. Slender perhaps, but unbroken. And when the verdict was read, I realized love could survive even the sharpest betrayal. My daughter's double life was never something I could have imagined, let alone prepared for. Every secret she kept, every lie she told, carved a space between us that seemed impossible to bridge. Yet through the courtroom battles, the sleepless nights, and the endless questioning of where I went wrong, one truth became clear. Love doesn't disappear because trust is broken. It endures quietly, even when the heart is shattered. Sitting there in the silence after the verdict, I thought about all the moments we had shared, the scraped knees I bandaged, the late-night stories, the small victories and ordinary joys that had once defined our world. Those moments weren't erased. They were buried beneath the chaos, waiting for understanding and forgiveness to bring them back into the light. Betrayal has a way of testing the strongest bonds, but truth has its own timing. And sometimes, the pain we endure teaches us more than the happiness we once knew. In the end, my daughter's double life nearly destroyed me, but it also taught me that truth, no matter how painful, will always come to light.